Marcus Whitfield was 39 years old, and for 11 years he had been the quiet man who fixed what other people broke. He drove a 15-year-old pickup with a cracked taillight and a toolbox bolted into the bed. He wore the same 3 flannel shirts in rotation and ate lunch out of a steel thermos his grandmother had given him. His wife's friends called him Handy Marcus, the way you describe a useful appliance, and Vanessa never once corrected them. She just smiled that small practice smile and changed the subject to her own promotions. He came home early on a Tuesday in March, a job in Charlotte having wrapped 2 days ahead of schedule, and he found the locks changed. Not jammed, changed. New brass, still bright, the wood around the strike plate freshly chiseled. Through the front window he saw boxes. His boxes, his tools, his books, his grandmother's quilt, all stacked by the door like things set out for the trash. And he saw Vanessa on the couch with a man in a tailored gray suit, the two of them laughing over wine glasses, comfortable in a way that takes months to build. $83,000 had moved out of their joint accounts over the previous 9 months, withdrawn in amounts small enough not to trip a single alert. What Vanessa never thought to ask, not once in 11 years, was why a man who fixed buildings for a living knew every contractor, every inspector, and every property attorney in 3 counties by their first names. What happened next would teach her that the cheapest-looking man in the room is sometimes the one who owns it. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning light filtered through the kitchen windows he had reframed himself 2 winters ago, and Marcus Whitfield sat with a mug of black coffee cradled in both hands, watching steam rise into the cold. The house was quiet in the way he liked it before the world started asking things of him. He had laid the tile under his feet, one piece at a time, kneeling on a folded towel through a long February, and he could still feel the satisfaction of a floor that sat dead level when everyone said the slab was too far gone to save. His grandmother had raised him in a house half this size, in a worse part of town, and she used to tell him, standing at her own stove, "Baby, let them think you're small. Small men get underestimated, and underestimated men get to watch." She had passed 4 years ago, but he heard her in every quiet room. Vanessa came down in her robe and kissed his cheek, and he caught a perfume he didn't recognize, something expensive and floral, that hadn't been in the house a month ago. She made bright small talk about a conference in Atlanta, her hand on the back of his neck for exactly as long as it took to seem warm, and then she was scrolling her phone with the screen tilted away from him, smiling at something he wasn't meant to see. He didn't ask. He had learned long ago that you get more from watching than from asking. He remembered the first time he saw her 12 years back at a hardware store of all places, standing in the plumbing aisle, holding 2 different fittings and looking genuinely lost. He'd shown her which one she needed for her sink and walked her through the repair, and she'd laughed at her own helplessness in a way that felt real then. Before she learned to perform helplessness as a strategy, she had been a junior account manager with secondhand shoes and enormous ambition, and he had loved how hungry she was. He had not understood yet that hunger like that never gets full. His other phone, the slim one he kept in the inner pocket of his work jacket, buzzed once against his chest. Only 2 people had that number. His attorney was one of them. He set down his coffee, looked at the message, and went still. The text was from Dale Robinson, who managed 3 of his properties, and it said only, "Saw V having lunch downtown with Carl Briggs. Thought you should know who Briggs is. Call me." Marcus knew exactly who Carl Briggs was. Briggs was a developer who had spent 2 years trying to buy a parcel on the east side of town, a corner lot with a tired brick building on it, that he wanted to flatten for condos. He had been blocked at every turn by the owner, who refused every offer, who held the deed in a trust, and would not sell at any price. The owner was Marcus. He drove to the building that afternoon, the brick one Briggs wanted so badly, and he stood across the street looking at it for a long time. It was the first property he had ever bought 15 years ago with money saved 1 careful paycheck at a time and a loan he had paid off 3 years early. He had bought 11 more since. He owned a block of storefronts, 2 small apartment buildings, a warehouse he leased to a furniture company, and the very office tower where Vanessa's marketing firm rented the entire 4th floor. She had never once asked who their landlord was. She had no reason to. The trust that held it all was named after his grandmother, and his name appeared nowhere on the public documents. That night, he came home, and the second phone in Vanessa's purse, the one he wasn't supposed to know about, lit up on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. He did not pick it up. He simply read the preview that floated on the screen, a message from a contact saved as C, and it said, "Once the divorce clears and the trust is broken, you'll own half of everything he's been hiding. Patience." His hands didn't shake. He took out his own phone and photographed the screen, the timestamp, the contact name. Then he set her phone back exactly where it had been, angled the same way, and he poured himself a glass of water and drank it standing at the sink. So she knew about the properties, or thought she did. She had it half right, which was the most dangerous kind of wrong, because she believed the law would hand her half of a fortune she imagined to be community property. She did not understand that everything he owned had been purchased before the marriage, held in an irrevocable trust she had no claim to, and managed in a way her divorce attorney would spend months untangling, only to find nothing waiting at the end. Over the next 3 days, he documented everything. The $83,000 withdrawn in increments of $2,000 and $3,000 across 9 months. The lunches with Briggs, which Dale photographed from across a restaurant without being noticed. The pattern of the perfume, the second phone, the conference trips that her own firm's calendar showed did not exist. He built a timeline the way he'd build a frame, one true joint at a time, until the whole shape of it stood square and undeniable. She had been planning this for nearly 2 years. On the 4th night, he opened a folder on his laptop and named it after the corner building, the first one he ever bought. And into it, he put every document, every photograph, every screenshot. Then he made a single phone call. "Patricia," he said quietly when she answered. "It's time. Bring the file." Patricia Hale had been his attorney for 9 years, a silver-haired woman with reading glasses on a chain, and a reputation among developers as the person you did not want across the table. She met him the next morning in her office, spread his documents across the conference table, and went through them without changing her expression once. "The trust is airtight," she said finally. "Your grandmother's estate planning was better than 90% of what I see from people worth 10 times this. Nothing acquired before the marriage is touchable, and you've added nothing to it since. She gets the joint account, which she's already drained, and she gets half the equity in the house, which is the only marital asset that exists." She took off her glasses. "Marcus, she's going to walk into mediation expecting millions. There's nothing there for her." "I know," he said. "There's more." She slid a folder toward him. "You asked me to look into Carl Briggs. He's not a developer with deep pockets. He's a developer with a lot of debt and 2 civil judgments against him for fraud. He's been promising investors returns on a condo project he can't break ground on, because he can't get the land. Your land, if those investors knew the deal was vapor, they'd pull out and he'd collapse inside a month." Marcus sat with that for a moment. He needs Vanessa to think she's getting the property. He needs her to believe it, Patricia said. So she keeps the divorce moving and keeps him in the picture. The man is selling a fortune he doesn't have to investors, using a marriage he isn't part of, built on assets he can't reach. She allowed herself the smallest smile. It's a house of cards in a stiff wind. That afternoon, he drove out to see his Uncle Theo, his grandmother's youngest brother, who lived in the same house he'd lived in for 40 years and still cut his own grass at 78. Theo poured them sweet tea and listened to the whole thing on the back porch without interrupting. "Your grandmother saw something in that girl she didn't like the first day you brought her around," Theo said when Marcus finished. "She told me, that one's measuring the rooms. I thought she was being hard." He shook his head slowly. She wasn't being hard. She was being right. "What do I do, Theo?" Theo, the old man, looked out at his yard for a long while. "You don't do anything ugly. Ugly is for people who lost. You already won, you just have to let her find out." He took a long drink of his tea. "A snake bites you, you don't bite it back. You just step off the path and let it run out of poison on its own." Marcus carried that line home with him like a tool in his pocket. He went back to living his ordinary life. He ate dinner across from Vanessa and listened to her talk about a conference that didn't exist. He fixed the dripping faucet in the guest bath because it bothered him to leave it broken. When she kissed his cheek goodnight, he did not flinch. He answered her questions about his week with the same flat, tired-sounding answers he always gave, the answers of a man with nothing to hide and nothing worth taking. She had no idea she was performing for a man who already had the whole script. 3 weeks later, the divorce papers arrived, served to him at the house by a man in a polo shirt who looked embarrassed to be doing it. Marcus signed for them, read them at the kitchen table, and noted that Vanessa's attorney had listed the trust properties as marital assets, subject to division. They had taken the bait completely. They believed the building was theirs to split. Mediation was set for a Thursday in a downtown conference room, and Vanessa arrived in a new suit with Carl Briggs waiting in the lobby like a man about to collect. She walked in expecting to leave wealthy. She found Patricia Hale already seated, and beside her a forensic accountant, and beside him a representative from the trust, and a stack of documents squared at the center of the table. Patricia did not raise her voice. She slid the first document across. This is the trust instrument, dated 4 years before the marriage, irrevocable, holding all 12 properties your client believes are marital assets. They are not. They never were. Mr. Whitfield acquired every one of them prior to the marriage and has added nothing during it. Vanessa's smile held, barely, the second document. This is a record of $83,000 withdrawn from the joint account over 9 months, which under state law will be credited against your client's share of the only true marital asset, the house. After that offset, the marital estate owes your client approximately nothing. The smile was gone now. Patricia laid down the third set of papers, and these were not for Vanessa. They were for Briggs, who had drifted into the doorway. And these, she said, are the civil judgments against Mr. Briggs, the SEC inquiry into his investor representations, and a notarized statement that the corner property at Fulton and Vine is not now and never will be available for purchase. We've sent copies to his 3 principal investors this morning. Briggs went white. He turned and walked out of the building and did not come back. Vanessa looked at the papers spread before her and then at Marcus, who had not said a single word the entire time. You, she said, you own all of it. You let me think. I let you think I was small, Marcus said quietly. You decided the rest yourself. Her eyes filled and her voice softened, and she said it had gotten away from her, that she'd been confused, that Briggs had pushed her into it, that they could find a way back if he'd only listen. Patricia started to speak, but Marcus raised one hand, and she stopped. 11 years you lived in my house and never once asked what I built, he said. That wasn't an accident. You weren't curious about me because you'd already decided what I was worth. He stood and gathered his coat from the back of the chair and tucked the folder under his arm. I fix things that other people break, but some things you don't fix. You just stop standing under them when they fall. He walked out. The room stayed silent behind him. Vanessa remained at the table, surrounded by the paperwork that mapped line by line the exact dimensions of everything she had never understood. 8 months had passed like water. Marcus stood on the back deck of a house he'd spent the spring renovating, a smaller place out past the county line with good bones and a bad roof he'd already replaced. The evening light came down gold across a yard he'd cleared by hand, and along the fence line he'd planted a row of young dogwoods that would flower white in another year. The coffee in his hand was hot, and the air smelled of cut cedar from the workshop he'd framed out himself. He had taken the warehouse lease and expanded it into a second building, and a furniture maker he'd helped get started was now hiring 14 people out of the neighborhood his grandmother raised him in. He put her name on the door of a foundation that paid trade school tuition for kids who reminded him of himself at 17, and the first class of 6 had just finished their certifications. Renee came out onto the deck and handed him a plate, an architect he'd met when she'd asked smart questions about his warehouse load calculations, and hadn't pretended to be impressed by anything she wasn't. She asked about people, not about money. She was easy to be around in a way he was still getting used to, and she stood beside him at the rail without needing to fill the silence. He heard about Vanessa the way Theo said he would, secondhand from Dale. She was in a 1-bedroom across town, working a front desk job at a marketing firm, 2 tiers below the one she'd left. The divorce having cost her the joint account she'd already spent and half the equity in a house she'd had to sell. Carl Briggs had declared bankruptcy and moved to a smaller city after his investors sued. Vanessa's own sister had stopped taking her calls, embarrassed by what the family had learned. The phone had rung 83 times the week his name appeared on the dedication plaque at the foundation building, a number he noticed and did not find funny, and did not return. He registered all of it. Then he set it down and let it go, because bitterness was just rent you kept paying on a house you'd already moved out of. The sun dropped lower, and he pressed the last seedling of the season into the soil at the edge of the deck, firming the earth around it with his thumbs. The same hands that had laid 1,000 floors and signed 100 deeds and never once raised themselves in anger. Renee said something quiet and he laughed. The real kind, and the dogwoods stood thin and patient along the fence, waiting on their season the way good things do. Some things, he thought, are worth the patience to build right. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.